Hello and welcome back to another episode of my Ability System series. In today's video we are going to create another type of spell. This time that will be buffs. So buff spells can be found in almost any RPG or MMORPG. The basic idea behind them is that you activate them on yourself or an ally. It has a certain duration, and for that duration a certain effect will take place. So that could be increasing your stats, making you receive less damage, or regenerate mana. Before we can start today, I just want to let you know that I imported this buff border texture. The download link for that will be in the description, of course. So once you've got that imported into your textures folder, just double click it and let's set the compression to user interface and the texture group to UI. Then we can save it and get starting. So first off, we need a widget to display our buff. So all of our buffs will be shown right underneath our mana bar, and we will see how much time there is left on them. To do that, let's go into our widgets folder and create a new user interface widget blueprint that we'll call w_buff. Then double click that and set up preview mode here to desired on screen. Let's kill the canvas panel and we will start with a size box. Check the width and height override. And all in all, our buff widget will be 46 by 46 pixel. Then we can zoom in on it. And in our size box, we will start with an overlay. Then add another size box. Make that size box align center, both horizontally and vertically. Then check width and height override, and we'll set that to 41 by 41. Then we'll also add an overlay to our second size box. We'll make the overlay fill. After that, we will add an image to the overlay. Set that image to fill as well. Let's call that the buff icon. Make sure it's set to be a variable, and we can give it a default image. Just search for skill. And we could use, for example, the icon Flame Nova just to see how it will look. On top of our buff icon, we will add another image that will be displaying the cooldown or the duration left. Set that to horizontally and vertically fill. Let's call that duration mat. Because here we won't use a texture but a material, and that will be our mi underscore skill cooldown. So now you see our circular progress bar that we created in one of the first videos. Let's lower the alpha to 0.7 maybe. Set the visibility to hidden by default. And we want to change the starting point and direction of our circular progress bar. To do that, we can just increase the angle to 90 and then flip it. So we'll just set the scale in Y to -1. And the last thing here is a text, so put that onto our overlay. Our text will be aligned to the center. Default text will be something like 23 or something, just so we can see that. And this here will be the duration text. Make that a variable. Font size of 20 maybe, and the font type can be regular. Then we will give that an opaque shadow and set its visibility to hidden by default. Also, just so it looks like it's in the center, I will give it a padding of 2 to the top. The last thing we want to do is add another image, and this time to our first overlay. So this will be displayed on top of everything else. Set that to fill, uncheck the variable, we can just call that border, and then use the texture we just imported, so a buff border. Alright, compile and save. Let's head over to the graph. And in here we just want one variable, which will be the icon. This is a texture to D. Reference should be editable and expose on spawn. And on event construct, we'll just take a buff icon and set brush from texture. Then hook up our icon as the texture. After that, drag in our duration mat and get dynamic material Then promote the return value to a variable called dynamic duration mat. And that's it for our buff widget. We can close that. But now we also need a container for it in our main widget. So let's open that up. And in here we will just add a horizontal box. Make that size to content, the order of 1. We can call that our buff box. And make it a variable. Position I'll set to 16 in X and 128 in Y. And we can leave it like that. So just compile, save, close the main widget. Now we want to create our skill class. So let's go to our skill actors, master skill, and create a child, which we will call skill_buff. So this will be the parent class for all the buff skills that we are going to create. Open that up, go to the event graph, and we need a variable here. So this will be the buff icon. And of course that is the text_d. You could also use the icon of the spell, which is in our skill info spell icon. But just in case you want to have a different icon for the actual effect than for the spell, we are going to make that a separate variable. And then add another variable, and that will be the buff widget ref. And the variable type will be w_buff reference. Okay. Before we continue in here, let's just quickly drag it aside and open up our skill character. Because in our skill character we want to keep track of all the buffs that are currently affecting us. So let's add a new variable, call that current buffs, and type for that will be skill_buff reference, and let's make that an array because there can be multiple buffs applied to us. Compile and save. Also we need a couple of helper functions in here. So first one, let's call that hasBuff question mark. It will be a pure function, which means that it doesn't have an execution pin. Give it an input, and that will be a skill buff class. Call that buff. So this will be the class we're looking for, and then it will have two outputs. First one a boolean called out question mark. So have we found that buff? And if so, we also want to pass through a reference to it. So this will be a skill buff reference, and just call that found buff. Right? Then let's promote our class to a local variable called local class, and create another variable called local found, which will be a skill buff but a single variable, not an array. Okay, so once we've got that hooked up, we can drag in our current buffs, get them, and run a for each loop with break. Connect the local class to the execution. And now for every array element we want to get its class and check whether it equals the local class that we're looking for. Add a branch. If that is true, we can just set our local found to the array element. And after we did that, we can break out of our loop. Maybe add some reroute nodes. Alright. And then once we've got it completed, we'll get a local found and check whether it is valid. If it is valid, we found it. If not, then we didn't find a buff of that type. So if it's not valid, just return with false and null. But if it is valid, copy over the return node and we will return true and a local found for the found buff. Right? Compile and save this. Add another function called addBuff, which will have one input. Again, this will be a skill buff called buff, and it will also have one output, because in our character we're going to create the buff widget and we need to make that an output so that later when we call this function in our buff skill we have a reference to it and can promote that to a variable in there. So this will be a w_buff reference called widget. First off, let's check whether our current buff already contains the buff that we're trying to add. Then add a branch. If it does, we cannot add it twice, so we'll just return with null. But if it's false, we can get our current buff, add an element to it. Element will be our input. Then we want to create a widget, the class being our w_buff, and the icon will come from our input, so we'll just get the buff icon. Then we also want to show our buff widget, so we need to add it to the horizontal box in our main widget. So get the main widget, get the buff box, and add child to horizontal box, then connect the return value. And after we did all of that, we can return and connect our return value to the widget. Alright, let's right click and duplicate our add buff, but this will be remove buff now. Remove buff doesn't need an output, and here we need to swap the execution path. So if we haven't found it in our current buffs, then we can't do something, so we'll just return. But if we did, we can proceed, and instead of adding to the current buff, we want to remove item. Which will come from our input. Then off of our input, grab the reference to our buff widget and remove that from parent. We don't need to create a buff widget, don't need the buff icon, and we don't need to add it to a box. Alright, so just after we removed it from the array, we remove the buff widget from parent, and afterwards return. Okay, that's it for our skill character for now. Let's go back to our skill buff. And here we need a couple of events, so add custom event. First one will be called apply effect. Control C, Control V, call that remove effect. Copy it once more. This will be reset buff. Copy, paste, call it on activated. Copy, paste, and this one will be on deactivated. Alright, those are the 5 events that we're going to be using. The apply and remove effects we can put aside, because those will define what the buff actually does and will therefore be implemented only in the child classes. Then let's override the onSkill event onSkill notify that we've got. First add a call to parent, just in case we ever add something in our parent class to that. And afterwards get our player reference, check for has buff, and we want to see whether our buff is already applied. So for the buff class, we just get class, and the object will be self. Plug that in for the buff and add a branch off of the out boolean. If that buff is already applied and we're using it, we will just going to reset the duration. So we'll call onReset or reset buff, and let's connect the found buff to the reset buff. If we haven't found it though, we will just call onActivated. Alright, let's move that up and let's do the onActivated event first. But before we start, let's go somewhere here and add a timeline, because we'll use that to drive our duration. Just call that duration timeline. No need to add anything in there. Let's also create a variable called duration. Make that a float, and create a variable called past time, also float. Now in our onActivated, we will first apply the effect. Then copy our player reference and add buff, the buff being ourselves. Then we can set our buff widget reference to the output of that. Let's get our current stage, break it, and let's hide everything except for the duration. Then set duration to our duration and set the path time to 0. Afterwards, let's expand our components, get the duration timeline, and we want to set timeline length to the duration, so plug that in. After we set the timeline length, we should be ready to start the timeline, but before we do that, we need to get our buff widget reference because our duration text and material are currently hidden. So get duration text and get duration mat. Set the visibility of one of these to visible and connect the other one to the target as well. And after we did that, we can play our duration timeline from start. Right? Now, once our duration has finished, basically means the buff ended, so we will call on deactivated. And now we need to worry about our update. So let's copy our buff widget reference here, get the text for the duration, set text. But before we set the text, we want to update our path time. So we set path time and get our duration timeline, get playback position, and feed that into our path time. Right? Then we can set the text, and we will set it to our duration minus the path time, so which basically is our time left, and convert that to a text. Then expand the options here. We will round half to 0, uncheck use grouping, and we won't use any fractional digits, so just set minimum and maximum to 0. Alright, so that's it for updating our text. Now we also need to update our circular progress bar that we have. So let's get the dynamic duration material, set scalar parameter value, and you might remember that our parameter name is called %. Make sure to spell that correctly, otherwise it won't work. And the value here will simply be the path time divided by the duration, and plug that in for the value. Once we've got our onActivated event, the reset buff is very simple. We will just move that to where we set the duration and then connect that up there. Then let's do the onDeactivated. First off, we will remove the effect. So call that event we've got here. Then get our player reference, call remove buff, buff being ourself again. And after we did that, we know that our buff widget was destroyed, so we can set the variable to null. Basically, that's already it for the buff logic. We can just compile, save, and close our buff. Now we need to create an example spell for it. And let's first search for an animation. So characters, animations, attacks. And I thought that the attack 02 montage might work quite well for a buff. The problem is that we've got no notify in here yet. So we look for a frame maybe somewhere here where the hand is raised. Scroll down to notifies, add notify, skill not, save it, close the attack 02. Then we want to go back to our blueprints skill actors and create a child of the skill buff. Let's call that skill underscore focus of mind. That will be our example spell. Double click. The buff icon will be focus icon underscore focus of mind. The skill animation will be attack 02. Expand the skill info, name will be focus of mind. icon we can copy from our buff icon. Element will be element arcane. Target will be self. We will add one stage to it. Cooldown maybe 10 seconds. Duration will be 20 seconds, just so we can test resetting the buff. And let's say a mana cost of 100. Then the casting time I'll just set to 2 seconds maybe. Don't know how long it takes. And now you see that it is extremely simple to create a buff effect with the logic we've got in our parent class. We will make it so that this buff will restore mana as long as it's active. So every 2 seconds we will restore a bit of mana to the player. And the only thing that you need to do in order to create this is to override the event apply effect and the event remove effect. And here we will just set timer by event. Let's say every 2 seconds this will tick, make it looping, promote the return value to a buff timer. And for the event, let's create a custom event, call that mana restore. And what we're just going to do is get our player reference, modify stat being mana, let's say by 30, and we'll make that animated. Then when we remove the effect, we only need to stop the timer. So get it and clear and invalidate timer by handle. Right, so that's it for the spell, but we have to add it to our starting spells, otherwise it won't appear. So let's go to skill characters, starting skills, and let's exchange the arcane side by skill _ focus of mind. Compile, save, and we should be ready to test this. So let's hit play. And if I hit F6, you will see that we have a little buff appearing here with the duration, and every 2 seconds we are restoring mana. I could use another spell just to show you. There was the restore. Now our buff is still ticking. If I use F6 again, it will be reset to its duration of 20 seconds. And once the duration has passed, our buff will disappear and we can restore it by pressing the spell again. Alright, that's it for creating buffs. Thank you for watching and see you in the next episode.